taking the water and spreading it out across various points and keeping it up at a higher elevation rather than down at the bottom. Although they do have one down at the bottom too, and depending on orientation to the sun and such, you know, an ideal house spot would be somewhere down here where you've got all that water above you that you can make use of, plus a storage of it right there. Does that make sense to everybody? Am I going too fast? Yes? Yeah? Okay. This is one that Sean put in, and I'm not sure what it was he wanted to illustrate here, but we can go over. This is a good illustration of contour lines, so we can just quickly run through it. The arrows, all the arrows, indicate downhill. Right, that's the direction that water will flow on this site. So if you look at this, you can see there's a high point here where everything will flow away like this, down to here. Then there's a bit of a lower point here, so this might be one that he's working on for a design right now. And see, he's got house marked over here, and there's some downhill away to a low point right there. That flows down, and around here you hit the same elevation right here, and then this is a little bit lower. And then likewise up there, everything's flowing down into these low points up here. So you can see the arrows actually help illustrate it a fair bit, the direction that things will flow on the land. Make sense? So access. This is a beautiful yard site, this one. It's set up. We've got the house. We've got, this is, the people who write these books are from Australia, so everything is kind of inverted, right? The sun would be that direction because they're in the south. So we've got the house, the sunny side of the house where the garden is. And so you can see how they've done a fair bit of planning into how are you going to get to everything, all the elements that you're putting into your design on your site for your beds, for your gardening and that kind of stuff. We've got pond, herb spiral, that kind of stuff. How do I get out and around to the larger scale things? Even way out, this is showing fairly close to the house, but you get farther out if you've got more land. Where they would be keeping chickens, and they've got, it says orchard there. So this is number 2 on the priority list, right? After you've planned out for water, figure out what you're going to do with your water, where it's going to go, where you're going to store it. How are you going to get around to various aspects of the other elements in your site? And we'll show a bit more about those elements when we get into zones. This is an example of some of the planning you would do with structures. And so they've got a pig pen. And you see they're doing water catchment off the roof here, catching it. Once again, they're in Australia, so they don't ever have to worry about that thing freezing on them. We would have to do a lot more than just have a tank sitting out there like that, or we'd be in big trouble for a fair number of months of the year. But there are things you can do to insulate that and to keep it so that it wouldn't freeze. So you've got a pig pen, and as part of their design to deal with manure collection, because manure collection can be quite literally a pain in the butt. I thought that was funny. But it can be a lot of work, right? Animals, like I said, they're not great energy stores because they're constantly moving stuff through them, so to speak. And so to help with this, they've designed this where they put a grate so that they can collect the manure. Also, any other spots, it'd be very easy to come in with a rake and shovel and such and just scrape it down to a trailer that's already below in this fancy little driveway that they've put together here. And they can just come down, hitch up, pull out one trailer, go dump it, put it back. It's pretty slick. So that's an example of one of the things you would consider with structures. This is respect to animals. With your own structures, of course, there would be thinking about your sunlight exposure. For us here, you have southern exposure to get solar gain and such to help with heating. Methodologies. Techniques, obviously, that's how you do things. Strategies are really when you would do this, right? A strategy for something is you would put this in place. Design and patterns. Any architects, architectural types in the room? IT? You're in IT? You're in IT? Okay. I'm in IT as well. Design patterns, you guys talked about design patterns ever in any of your IT stuff? What they mean? No?
So like design patterns for programming, so you have a pattern and then you just use
Model
it.
view controller, that's a design pattern, right?
Yeah.
Yes? Not familiar with that one?
Which one?
Model view controller, when you're building systems, your view is your user presentation, right? The model is the business, the controller is the part in between. So patterns are everywhere. Fellow by the name of, I was asking about architecture, that sort of thing, because there's a fellow by the name of Christopher Alexander who wrote a book about design patterns called Pattern Language, I think is what it was called. And it's actually probably 25, 30 years ago that he wrote that, where he uses architectural patterns and talks about patterns related to architecture and what we use. So what we do as we're getting into design and that is you need to start to understand and notice patterns and natural patterns that are out there so that you can put them to use in your designs when you start building permacultural systems. This is another key part, observation. Lots of things. Going out to a site and just walking around the site and looking at it, looking at the contours, looking at the vegetation that's there, the soil. What's the soil like? Knowing about the weather patterns in the area where you're building the site, because you do have to design for changes in weather and what might happen. Or say if there's a wet season and a dry season and you don't know that when you're designing, you could be in lots of trouble. So you need to go and do some research about those kinds of things. Maps are another great one. We just looked at contours and getting a map where you have the contours and the elevation change will really help a lot when you're doing your designs. Well, elements of the system, right? This is another way. This is something that I think you do this a lot as exercises when you're learning about permaculture, and then you would get to the point where you would do a lot of this just in your head, and you would go, yep, I know what this element needs and what this element produces and what this element needs and this element produces, and you will get, so you put them together like this, say. So very rudimentary when you're looking at it, and it's good practice to do this for a while to get so that you start thinking this way. And so, what are little, I don't even know what kind of chicken that is. Let's say a Rhode Island Red, just for the heck of it. So what does the chicken need, right? Well, it needs food, water, obviously, it needs air to breathe. Chickens need grit, the way their stomachs work, right? They pick up pebbles and they use that used to help with their digestion. They need protection of some sort because chickens aren't able to defend themselves all that well. What do they produce? Manure, which isn't a waste product, right? Manure can be used and recycled back into the system. Feathers, lots of uses for that. They do produce heat, produce eggs, of course, food,